Bring National Post beyond the headlines. Shop official merch including hoodies, hats, mugs, tote bags, and more. Designed for readers who like their journalism bold. Visit postmedia.store today. 40 years ago this month, Vancouver welcomed the world. And while our coastal neighbors have since hosted the Olympics and will be one of two Canadian cities welcoming global soccer fans for the World Cup, it was Expo 86 that helped put Vancouver on the map. I'm Dave Breckenridge, and this is 10-3. Vancouver Sun journalist Dan Fumano joins me to discuss how the event turned Vancouver into the city we know now, the legacy left by Expo, and whether it could play host to another World's Fair. Don't forget you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. I'd love it if you could leave us a rating, a review, and tell your friends about the show. So Dan, some of our listeners may remember Expo 86. Some, like me, may have even gone to Vancouver for the Expo. I don't remember a lot. I remember the floating McDonald's, and maybe that's one thing we can talk about. But for those folks who are unfamiliar with the idea of a World's Fair, as I don't think there's been one held in Canada since anyway, what was Expo 86?
So Expo 86 was a World's Fair, as you say, which is this big international exhibition. And the tradition of these things goes back a long time. And there's been expositions going back a couple of centuries now where different countries would welcome, people from around the world to sort of show off technologies and different things like that. The sort of modern Expo tradition, with the International Bureau of Expositions, which is the overseeing kind of body based in France. They've been doing this for about 100 years. And you're right, there hasn't been an expo in Canada since Vancouver's Expo in 86. There actually hasn't been one in North America since Expo 86. They've had expos in other places around the world, the Middle East, Asia, Australia since then, but they haven't had one in North America. So a lot of listeners may be less familiar with these, or they may have gone to some of these overseas. But so when Vancouver hosted its expo in 1986, the theme, it was focused on transportation and communication. That was kind of the theme, and "World in Motion, World in Touch" was the slogan. And so it brought a bunch of people to Vancouver and over a number of months, and it was a big deal in Vancouver at that time, and kind of still to this day. It's it has the event is seen as a pretty pivotal point in Vancouver's kind of history as a city.
You say it lasted a few months, I believe something like 5 months. And when you say it brought a lot of people, like how many people came to Vancouver? And are we talking Canadians, Americans, people from around the world?
Yeah, so it was people from all over the world. It was, you're right. It was 5 months. It opened on May 2nd, 1986, and it ran until October. So I think it was 165 days. And the organizers had been expecting between 13 and 15 million visitors. Like ahead of the fair, they were expecting 13 to 15 million people. So obviously expecting pretty big numbers. But in the end, they actually blew those numbers out of the water, and they had more than 22 million visitors passing through the turnstiles. Now, some of those could be the same visitor coming multiple times, I think. But the point is, it was seen as a huge success, like in terms of attendance and in terms of the popularity of it. It was very successful, and most people remember it quite fondly. And it drew people from all over the world. And for a lot of people, it was kind of their introduction to Vancouver. A lot of people who didn't know very much about Vancouver, which at that time was a pretty small little kind of coastal town.
And when you talk about major events like this, the Olympics and the World Cup, for example, Vancouver's getting ready to be one of the host cities of the FIFA World Cup. There are people who are concerned about hosting the event in general, or the cost involved, the commitment to the event rather than to the needs of its residents. And you've seen some of that debate play out with the World Cup. Looking back 40 years
Definitely.
or even 40, 45 years in the lead up to Expo, were there roadblocks in getting it off the ground, or people that were saying, what are we doing here?
Oh, definitely. As you might expect, there were critics of Expo, people opposed to it. So back in 1980, so 6 years before the fair was scheduled to happen, but it was already it was in the works at that time. in 1980, there was a city councilor named Mike Harcourt who was deciding to make his first run for mayor of Vancouver. And he made his opposition to Expo and his criticisms and his concerns about Expo, he made it like a big plank of his mayoral campaign. And on the eve of that year's municipal election, Harcourt wrote a letter to the Bureau of International Expositions in France, um, saying, I'm running for mayor of Vancouver. I'm expecting to be the next mayor of Vancouver, and I am opposing Expo. I want you to reject the BC government's application. People were very upset with Harcourt for doing that. He was, people said he was sabotaging this important thing. Harcourt ended up getting elected as mayor, and then he was mayor for the next 6 years right through the lead up to Expo. And he tried during his time in mayor to address some of these things he was concerned about, largely things around how much the city was going to be on the hook for cost overruns and things like this. And he was trying to push to make sure that Vancouver got like lasting legacy benefits from having this big fancy carnival. And Harcourt, over the course of those 6 years, kind of went from being a staunch critic of Expo to being a big booster of it. And then for this recent story I did, I met with Harcourt and we had coffee and talked about it. And, he, in hindsight, I think he said it was 90% good. Like, not 100% good. There were some downsides to the fair, but he overall felt like it was a great success. So he went from being a big critic to a really big supporter and booster of the event. And of course, Harcourt went on later to become premier of BC for a number of years. And so anyway, that's just one person, but he was a fairly prominent person involved with Expo. And I think it is kind of indicative of the feeling that some people had, where there was a lot of concern about it. What's this going to cost for taxpayers? What are we really going to get out of it? What's the benefit in long term? But I think there were people like Harcourt who were worried about it, but a lot of them, by the end of it, had kind of come around to it. And when people look back now, I think it's mostly seen fondly. Again, not 100%. And for this recent story, I did speak with some people who were opposed to it and remain, are unconvinced. They still don't think it was the best way to spend all this money, that there's other things we could have done with public money. So not everybody was a fan, but there was some opposition leading up to it. But it's largely, people look back at it fondly. One of the big concerns in the lead up to it was the displacement of a lot of poor people, low-income people who lived in these like low-rent, single-room occupancy hotels and sort of boarding houses and stuff in Vancouver, especially in and around the downtown east side. A lot of people were displaced to make way so that some of these low-end hotels could rent out the rooms for tourists for much more money. And that displacement caused a lot of problems for a lot of poor people. So a lot of people were opposed to it ahead of the fair for that reason. And Harcourt says, for him, that is still something he wishes didn't happen. It is one of the downsides of the event. But and for some people, that's something that they were really worried about before and still remain upset about.
We'll be right back. You look at Vancouver today, it's seen as one of Canada's like 3 major cities. I know I'm in Edmonton, and folks in Edmonton may say, hey, what about Edmonton? We're a major city. But if for people outside of Canada, they think, Toronto, Montreal, Vancouver kind of is the 3.
Well, Edmonton has a lot more Stanley Cups than Vancouver.
That's true.
So
that's true. But, you look at Vancouver's reputation now. It's seen as one of Canada's major cities. It has a reputation beyond Canada. It certainly has a reputation in the entertainment industry that it helped burnish through the 90s. But was it Expo that helped put Vancouver on the map in this way? And was it just the fact that it brought so many people here, or it made people aware that there's this gorgeous, temperate city on the west coast of Canada that, is kind of a hidden gem? Like what is it about Expo that helped Vancouver kind of stand out?
Yeah, it was sort of, as I said earlier, it was kind of a lot of people's introduction to Vancouver. It brought a lot of people here who may have never been here before, or didn't really know much about Vancouver. And then a lot of them ended up coming back or investing in Vancouver. It attracted a lot of investment to Vancouver. American money, Asian money, money from Toronto or elsewhere in Canada. So it is kind of credited with bringing in this wave of investment and you mentioned the movie industry, which is a huge deal in the film and TV production has been a big deal in Vancouver in for a few decades now. But apparently, I mean, so I don't really remember Expo. I was 2 years old during Expo, so I was there, but I don't recall it, and I certainly don't remember the years leading up to it. But I spoke with a couple of people. I spoke with Robin Leckie, who is a Vancouver-based movie producer who worked on several of the pavilions at Expo, and I was asking him, like, was Vancouver always kind of Hollywood North? Like, so I can remember in the '90s when the X Files was getting filmed here, and a lot of big American movies were being filmed here, and so that's kind of I can. As long as I can remember, movie and TV production has been a major industry here, a major employer. But Robin Leckie, when I was asking this local producer, he was saying it wasn't a big thing in the 1960s, 70s. Movie and TV wasn't a huge industry here, and Expo was something that helped really. That was one of the industries that local industries that Expo helped get off the map, or get off the ground, I should say. And so I think Expo had a lot to do with that, and it also brought a ton of interest in money into real estate development here. And then so a lot of people can look at that, and it's good and bad, depending on people's points of view. There are still some people who say, oh, Expo introduced the world to Vancouver, and it brought a ton of interest and attention and a lot of money. But some people say, well, maybe that rising tide didn't float all boats equally. That there are concerns about that. And then similarly, about a generation later, you've got Vancouver hosts the Olympics, right? In 2010, Vancouver hosted the Winter Olympics. Mm-hmm. Similarly, centered the world's attention on Vancouver, brought a new wave of interest and investment. The tourism industry, it was, got even bigger. But again, some concerns that, oh, well, there's all this money coming in, but maybe it doesn't benefit or help everybody equally or in the same way. So we heard it was kind of a similar echo in the lead up to the Vancouver Olympics.
Yeah. Looking at Expo, and I know you also have the Olympic piece of it, and that can change the landscape of a city as well. But when you look at the legacy of Expo 86, kind of what is it that people point to? Is it venues or development that was created out of Expo, or landmarks that grew out of this event? When people look back and say, okay, this is the legacy of Expo 86, what do they point to?
Yeah, so first off, in terms of the legacy, there is that sort of more intangible, like what we're talking about, like introducing Vancouver to the world, introducing the world to Vancouver, elevating the profile of Vancouver as a place to visit or live or work or invest. So there's that, which is a little more intangible. I remember, Harcourt, just to quote him again, he said something to the effect of, Vancouver took Expo from being, Expo took Vancouver from being the last stop on the CP rail line. That previously Vancouver was the last stop on the CP rail line. Now it's seen as the front door of Canada to the Asia and the Pacific and the rest of the world. And it's like kind of elevated Vancouver in this global profile. So there's that side of it, which is, elevating Vancouver's profile. That's a little more intangible. But in terms of tangible things, Expo brought a number of physical there's a number of physical pieces of the legacy that are actually a lot of Vancouver's most kind of iconic postcard images. Mm-hmm. So Science World, the big geodesic dome on False Creek, which is today, a beloved institution that millions of kids have gone and learned about science and technology. That was created for Expo, and then it became the home of Science World afterwards. BC Place, our big stadium where we're going to be hosting these FIFA World Cup games coming up, and it's where we had the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympics, and they've had the rugby sevens there, and cricket, and a bunch of big international events. Taylor Swift, that's when she's coming to town. She's playing BC Place, and she played multiple nights there. So that was a big stadium that was built in lead up to Expo. And crucially, the SkyTrain. It's called SkyTrain. It's a rapid transit line. That was built in the lead up to Expo. Previously, we didn't really have like rapid transit. Like Vancouver doesn't have a metro like Montreal and Toronto had. So now Vancouver has this rail line, like high speed. Part of it's elevated, part of it's underground, but it's been expanded since then to other lines. And so that is a very important piece of, it was a transportation themed fair, and we got this long lasting, high quality, high speed, rapid transit line out of it. The convention center, the city's old convention center, the sails on the Cole Harbor waterfront,
Mhm.
the harbor of Vancouver. It's kind of one of the iconic images of Vancouver, is that convention center with those white sails. So all of these things were created kind of in the lead up to Expo, part of Expo, and then the Expo grounds itself. You have these acres, this acreage of waterfront property that up until that point it was like, I think it's 80 some odd hectares of waterfront property on False Creek in sort of the downtown Vancouver Peninsula that previously was rail yards, warehouses, kind of gravel lots in kind of industrial and post-industrial. It was used for the fair, and then after the fair was over, it was sold to an investment group from Hong Kong and then they developed it over the next decades into what is this kind of iconic, famous postcard neighborhood. That False Creek North neighborhood um, has become one of the sort of defining images of Vancouver. When people market Vancouver around the world, they're often showing that Yaletown Marina, the seawall there. It's a beautiful area, very high density with tall, shiny glass towers. There didn't end up being as much affordable housing in that neighborhood as there was initially envisioned, but it is largely seen as a very successful, thriving urban downtown community. Uh, and so a lot of these physical things, Expo really changed the physical nature of Vancouver in a very profound way.
Mhm.
And even a lot of Expo's staunchest critics, the people who feel like this was not the best way to spend money, um, a lot of them can still point to a few of those things and say, well, you know, the SkyTrain is pretty great. Like that's a good way for people who don't have cars can still get around. So even the critics might agree that some of these things have benefited the people of Vancouver long
Yeah.
term.
Do you think that given that legacy and what is seen, as you mentioned, I think it was Mike Harcourt said it's kind of about 90% positive legacy, that there could be appetite for another similar World's Fair to be held in Vancouver, or because you've hosted the Olympics and you've hosted now hosting the World Cup this year, and because there are concerns about what these events do to people who may be on the fringes, that there isn't
Yeah.
an appetite for putting the kind of resources into this large scale international event again?
Yeah. I think people are pretty divided on that question. In my story, I spoke with Miro Chernetich, he was a former Vancouver Sun journalist. He came to Vancouver in 1986 specifically to report on Expo. And Miro's done a number of things since then. He's not at the Vancouver Sun anymore, and he runs a company called City Age, and they work with people around the world. And he said his opinion was he said Vancouver should have another Expo, and so I included that quote. We need to invite the world back and get our mojo back and get Vancouver going again. And so I included that comment, and the emails I got from readers were very divided on that point. Some people said, "Oh, that would be the worst thing we could possibly do." Some people said, "He's right. We need to, get this going again." And so it was interesting to see kind of how divided responses were. Just my kind of unscientific um, polling of what I reader sentiment just based on the emails I got. But I do note we're having this conversation at a kind of a funny time because obviously Vancouver's on the verge of hosting these 7 World Cup games. And now the World Cup is kind of a pretty different proposition than either Expo or the Olympics, or frankly, even, in the 1950s, Vancouver hosted the Commonwealth
Mm-hmm.
Games. Um, but Expo and the Olympics, Vancouver was the host city. The world's attention's on Vancouver. This time around, we're one of 16 host cities, right? And I don't think there is, I get the sense a lot of people are excited about FIFA. People in the hospitality industry have had a rough couple of years. They're really hoping it's going to be a shot in the arm and be their busiest summer in a long time. So a lot of people are hoping that the FIFA World Cup does bring some money and activity to the city and vibrancy, and it's going to be a really fun summer. But there is some skepticism because we're not going to get those kinds of lasting, infrastructure legacy pieces like we got from Expo and from the Olympics. The 2010 Olympics, there was a lot of infrastructure, community centers, new rapid transit, to the airport, multi-billion-dollar kind of infrastructure upgrades. that we did get out of the development of a new neighborhood as well. Like, so we did get lasting benefits out of 2010 as well. I don't know, people in Vancouver, I feel like, are pretty skeptical that we're not going to get that kind of benefit out of FIFA. So I think there is kind of a wariness right now, but we'll see how it goes. Because if FIFA is a great success, and if people feel like, oh, that was awesome, we met people from around the world, it kind of helped boost Vancouver's profile again at a time when, the economy is slowing down and things are a little tougher out there. Like, if FIFA is a big success, I would imagine that would increase people's appetite for Vancouver to host some other kind of Expo or something else, some other big event at some point in the future, I imagine. And if Vancouver has seen it, if Vancouver sees FIFA as being more of an inconvenience, or at the end of this summer, if people are like, oh, that was kind of annoying and wasn't that fun, then that might dampen people's enthusiasm for these kinds of things. So I'm guessing we'll see how the FIFA World Cup goes this summer, and that might kind of dictate how interested people are around here in these kinds of things, and maybe in Toronto as well.
Yeah. Well, as far as that goes, best of luck with the FIFA World Cup games. I know Canada will be watching. Dan, thanks for your time.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dave.
10-3 is produced by Sean Knox. Theme music by Bryce Hall. Thanks to my guest, Dan Fumano. More from him at VancouverSun.com. I'm Dave Breckenridge. Thanks for listening.